Welcome to another chilling episode of Twisted Criminals, where we delve into the darkest corners of criminal minds. Today's tale is not for the faint-hearted, graphic and disturbing in nature. We must advise viewer discretion due to the graphic nature of the content. These tales of true crime strip away the veneer of normality, revealing the chilling depths of human depravity. If you appreciate the journey into the shadows, support us by subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing our Twisted Criminals channel. Your engagement fuels our commitment to bringing you the most compelling chronicles of crime. Brace yourselves. Imagine a young boy growing up in Colombia in the 60s, a time when the country was struggling with civil unrest and economic instability. This boy's name was Luis Garavito, and he was born into a world of hardship and adversity. His formative years were marred by neglect, poverty, and worst of all, abuse. Abuse that would shape his life in ways that are unfathomable to most. Garavito was the eldest of 7 children in a low-income family, where he was subjected to physical and emotional torment by his father. The abuse was relentless and brutal, leaving lasting scars on his psyche. And when he wasn't being abused at home, he was forced to navigate the perils of the streets, where he was often targeted for his vulnerability. In the midst of this hostile environment, Garavito's cries for help fell on deaf ears. There were no social services to intervene, no teachers to report his bruises, no therapists to address his trauma. He was, in every sense, a child lost in the system. As he grew older, this pattern of abuse and neglect persisted, warping his perception of the world and his place in it. He was conditioned to see violence as a norm, not an anomaly, and so the seeds of a monster were sown. But how does a victim become a perpetrator? How does a boy, so cruelly mistreated, transform into one of the world's most notorious serial killers? Some might argue that it's a question of nature versus nurture, but in Garavito's case, it seems that both elements conspired against him, creating a lethal cocktail of psychological damage and social disenfranchisement. This is not to excuse his heinous crimes, but rather to shed light on the circumstances that contributed to his descent into darkness. For it is only by understanding the making of a monster can we hope to prevent such tragedies from happening in the future. In the face of such adversity, Garavito's life took a dark turn. The scars of Garavito's past began to shape a horrifying future. As he matured, the torment of his childhood began to worm its way into his psyche, twisting and distorting his perception of the world around him. An insidious transformation was taking place, a metamorphosis from victim to perpetrator. Victimized, beaten, and marginalized during his formative years, Garavito began to exhibit early signs of a violent streak that would soon define his life. Outbursts of anger, cruelty to animals, and an unsettling fascination with violence were the initial glimpses into the darkness that was beginning to take hold. This darkness didn't remain confined to his thoughts for long. It soon spilled over into his actions as he began to commit his first crimes. His victims were not chosen at random. Instead, they bore a haunting resemblance to his own past. They were vulnerable, marginalized children who, like him, had been dealt a cruel hand by life. These were children who had no one to turn to, no one to protect them. And Garavito, with his own experiences of vulnerability and victimization, knew exactly how to exploit this. He knew how to gain their trust, how to lure them away, and how to ensure that no one would miss them when they were gone. His transformation was now complete. The abused had become the abuser. The child who had once been prey was now the predator. Yet, there was a perverse irony in his choice of victims. By harming those who reminded him of his own past, he was, in a way, attacking his own childhood, his own pain, over and over again. And so, Luis Garavito, once a victim of abuse and neglect, was now a ruthless child predator. His transformation was not one of healing or growth, but rather one of pain and destruction. The tormented child had been lost, and in his place stood a monster. Garavito had become a predator. His reign of terror was just beginning, and the world would soon come to know the name Luis Garavito as one synonymous with unspeakable horror. Garavito's heinous acts of violence began to multiply, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. This was not a sudden explosion of evil, but a slow, methodical escalation of unthinkable cruelty that targeted society's most vulnerable, innocent children. Luis Garavito, a name that has become synonymous with unimaginable horror, unleashed a reign of terror that spanned nearly a decade from around the late 80s to the late 90s. The victims of his monstrous acts were primarily young boys, often street children, who were lured with small gifts or the promise of casual work. Once he had gained their trust, Garavito would lead these unsuspecting children away to secluded areas. What followed was a brutal cycle of torture and abuse that would ultimately end in the child's death. Each crime was a chilling echo of the next, a testament to Garavito's calculated and methodical approach. The sheer magnitude of his crimes is staggering. It's believed that the number of his victims likely exceeds 150, though some estimates suggest it could be as high as 300. This would make Garavito one of the most prolific serial killers in history. However, the true horror of Garavito's crimes lies not just in the sheer number of his victims, but in the unimaginable suffering they endured. The physical and psychological torture inflicted upon them is too distressing to detail fully, but suffice to say, it left a lasting scar on the communities he targeted. Despite the brutality of his crimes, Garavito managed to evade capture for years. His victims were often children from impoverished backgrounds, forgotten by society, their disappearances unnoticed or ignored. This allowed Garavito to continue his reign of terror, largely undetected. As the years passed, the frequency of his crimes showed no signs of slowing. It was as if Garavito was trapped in a cycle of violence, each act feeding into the next, escalating in its horror and brutality. Yet, even the most careful and cunning of killers make mistakes. And it was these mistakes that would eventually lead to Garavito's downfall. But not before he had inflicted untold pain and suffering on countless innocent children. His reign of terror spanned years, leaving countless victims and unanswered questions in its path. As we delve deeper into the shadowy world of Luis Garavito, we will attempt to unravel the mystery surrounding this man, his motives, and the chilling legacy he left behind. As the bodies began to pile up, authorities started to piece together a terrifying puzzle. The investigation into the horrific crimes of Luis Garavito was an arduous odyssey that tested the resolve of law enforcement like never before. In the early stages, the sheer magnitude of the crimes posed a daunting challenge. With the victims spread across multiple jurisdictions, the task of correlating the cases was fraught with difficulties. It was a chilling realization that the same monster was responsible for the multitude of unsolved murders. The victims, all young boys from impoverished backgrounds, were difficult to identify and trace back to their families. This not only complicated the investigation, but also gave Garavito the advantage of time and anonymity. However, the investigators were determined not to let these hurdles stand in their way. They began to see patterns in the modus operandi. The victims were all lured away under the guise of small jobs or treats, then brutally attacked and killed. The signature was unmistakable, and it was clear they were dealing with a serial killer. The breakthrough came when a mass grave was discovered near the town of Genova. Here, investigators found a collection of victims, all bearing the same brutal hallmarks of Garavito's handiwork. But most importantly, they found a bag containing a pair of glasses, several empty liquor bottles, and a note with an address. The address led them to an old girlfriend of Garavito, who provided them with a photograph of him. With a face to the name, the hunt for Garavito intensified. The photograph was circulated widely, and a reward was offered for information leading to his arrest. However, it was not a tip-off, but a chance encounter with local police that led to his capture. Garavito was picked up on suspicion of attempted rape, and while in custody, his fingerprints were matched to those found at several crime scenes. As the net of justice tightened around him, Garavito continued to deny his involvement, but the evidence was overwhelming. The glasses found at the crime scene matched his prescription, and his DNA was found at multiple locations. The most damning evidence, however, was the detailed confession he gave when confronted with the enormity of his crimes. The investigation into Luis Garavito's reign of terror was a testament to the perseverance and dedication of the investigators. They faced a horrifying puzzle of unimaginable proportions and pieced it together with tenacity and conviction. With the net closing in, Garavito's reign of terror was about to come to an end. The monster was finally unmasked, but the scars left by his actions remain. A chilling reality we are confronted with when we delve into the capture and aftermath of Luis Garavito's horrific reign of terror. The year was 1999. An exhaustive investigation led to the capture of Garavito, a man who had, for years, been a phantom, a nightmarish spectre that haunted the lives of countless victims. The capture of this predator was a monumental victory for law enforcement, yet it was a hollow triumph, for the damage had already been done. Garavito's trial was a spectacle that gripped the nation. The courtroom was heavy with tension and sorrow, the air thick with the weight of the atrocities he had committed. As the gruesome details of his crimes were laid bare, a collective gasp echoed through the room. The sheer magnitude of his cruelty was almost too much to comprehend. After a long and grueling trial, Garavito was sentenced to 1,855 years in prison, a sentence that reflected the enormity of his crimes. Yet due to Colombian law, he can only serve a maximum of 40 years. The aftermath of Garavito's reign of terror was far-reaching. The victims' families were left to grapple with an unbearable loss, their lives forever marred by the unspeakable acts committed by this monster. Their agony is a testament to the profound impact of these heinous crimes. We must remember that behind every statistic there is a human story, a life that was cruelly cut short. The wider community was also deeply affected. This tragedy shook the very fabric of society, instilling a fear that lingered long after Garavito was behind bars. Yet in the face of such horror, the community rallied together. They stood united, their resilience a beacon of hope in the darkest of times. They refused to let this monster define them, choosing instead to honor the memory of the victims and ensure their stories were not forgotten. Garavito's capture and the subsequent trial served as a catalyst, a call to action. It highlighted the need for more robust child protection laws, better victim support, and more thorough investigations into missing children cases. It forced society to acknowledge the uncomfortable truth that monsters do exist, not in the pages of a horror novel, but in our very midst. Garavito's story serves as a chilling reminder of the monsters that can lurk in our midst. His capture and the trial that followed are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a symbol of justice served. Yet the aftermath of his crime serves as a stark reminder of the lasting impact of such atrocities. We must remember the victims, honor their stories, and continue to fight against the darkness, for only then can we ensure that such horrors are never repeated. Garavito's tale is one of darkness and despair, a stark reminder of the horrors humanity is capable of. From a childhood steeped in abuse to becoming a notorious predator, his life was a downward spiral into the abyss of inhumanity. This man, who subjected hundreds of innocent children to unspeakable horrors, is a chilling testament to the depths of depravity that exist within our society. Luis Garavito's story is not just about his heinous crimes, but also about the systematic failures that allowed his reign of terror to continue for years. His victims were often children from impoverished backgrounds, invisible to a society that should have protected them. His case underscores the urgent need for vigilance and the importance of safeguarding the most vulnerable among us. In the aftermath of Garavito's capture, the world was forced to confront the grim reality of his actions. His trial and subsequent incarceration sparked conversations about justice, punishment, and the rehabilitation of criminals. This discourse, while uncomfortable, is crucial in our ongoing struggle against such atrocities. However, the story doesn't end with Garavito's imprisonment. It continues with each one of us. It's incumbent upon us to learn from the past and strive for a future where such monstrous acts are unthinkable. We must remain vigilant, reporting any suspicious behavior and ensuring our communities are safe havens for all, especially our children. In retrospect, Garavito's life serves as a dire warning. It's a somber reminder that evil often lurks where we least expect it, and that our fight against such darkness is far from over. But it's also a call to action, urging us to rise above our worst fears and work towards creating a safer, more compassionate world. For more chilling stories of twisted criminals, don't forget to subscribe to the Twisted Criminals channel. Your support helps us continue to bring these important stories to light.